As a child, I really wanted to be the youngest person in the world to climb Mount Everest. When I found out that 13-year-old Jordan Romero had summited the world's highest peak, I was devastated. I was 11 at the time, and I had to pivot. Everest was unrealistic. So I started thinking, what else was there that I could be the first or the world's youngest to do? One idea has stuck with me for the last 11 years. It's a mega challenge that requires world-class climbing, extreme travel, immense fundraising, and massive logistical efforts. And that idea is to climb to the highest point in every country in the world. Welcome to the High Points series. No one's ever stepped foot on the highest point in every country. Will anyone ever? I'm not so sure. But by the end of this series, you might want to try and be the first. The High Point series is going to be a multi-part series. This first video will look at what the challenge entails, as well as some of the most difficult mountains from a technical standpoint. The next video will look at some of the peaks that present logistical nightmares. These are peaks like Paektu Mountain in North Korea and Mount Kenyeti in South Sudan. But there are also peaks like the Gunnbjorn ice fields, the highest point in Greenland and therefore Denmark. Part 3 of the series will look at some of the High Point Challenge trailblazers and shine a light on some of the unique adventurers who are already making headway in this massive endeavor. But without further ado, let's get into it. First off, how many countries are there? See, the answer is not so simple. The United Nations recognizes 193 countries, but then there are the UN observer states Palestine and the Holy See. Then there's also the unrecognized regions of Kosovo and Taiwan, as well as Antarctica, which nobody recognizes as a country, but still feels wrong to exclude from this challenge. With that said, it seems like for now, 198 is the right number. I say for now though, because it's quite likely that by the time you start this challenge, the number of countries in the world are going to be a bit different than by the time you finish. 198 does not mean 198 peaks though. Lucky you only has to climb 192 high points, since 6 of those peaks are shared between 2 countries. From shortest to highest, these shared peaks are Mont Richard Molar between Ivory Coast and Guinea, Korab between Albania and North Macedonia, Mount Hermon between Israel and Syria, Mont Blanc between France and Italy, Mount Stanley between the Democratic Republic of Congo and Uganda, and Mount Everest between Nepal and China. Lastly, it should be obvious, but you have to actually climb these mountains, so no motorized vehicles are allowed on the actual climbs, only to get you to the base. And yes, that looks a little bit different for countries like the Netherlands, whose high point is in a parking lot, but within reason, no vehicles allowed. So now that everyone understands the ground rules, what makes this challenge so hard from a climbing standpoint? Well, there's the big 3. Everest, K2, and Kanchenjunga are the tallest, second tallest, and third tallest peaks in the world. They each stand at over 8,500 meters and are exceptionally challenging. Just climbing one of them would be the accomplishment of a lifetime for most mountaineers. Of these 3 peaks, Everest might actually be the easiest. As of 2018, Everest had been summited 5,700 times, while 300 people had lost their lives trying to climb the world's tallest mountain. This makes its summit-to-death ratio about 6%. Kanchenjunga, on the other hand, has a summit-to-death ratio of 14.5%, while K2 has a staggering summit-to-death ratio of 29%. This also doesn't account for the fact that the climbers who are attempting K2 and Kanchenjunga are usually far more accomplished and experienced than the climbers on Everest. The next batch of challenges are the 11 peaks between 6,000 and 8,000 meters. In this group are 2 of the 7 summits, Aconcagua in South America and Denali in North America, as well as 3 of the 5 snow leopards, former Soviet peaks that stand above 7,000 meters. The snow leopard peaks in this group that top their respective countries are Ismoil Somoni Peak, formerly known as Peak Komunizama, and the highest point in Tajikistan, Tengri, which is either 6,995 meters or 7,010 meters, depending on whether or not the glacial cap is included in the measurement, and Cengiz Çokusu, formerly known as Peak Pobeda, the highest point in Kyrgyzstan. It's probably also the second toughest climb of the 11 in this group. The most difficult climb in this group, perhaps more difficult even than K2, is Bhutan's Gangkhar Puensum. The crown of the Kingdom of Bhutan stands at 7,570 meters and is the highest unclimbed peak in the world. The reason it remains unclimbed is a blend between its technicality and Bhutan's cultural protections. Bhutan has a unique history of limiting tourism to protect their culture and environment from outside influence. More than 70% of Bhutan is covered in forest, helping it to become the only carbon-negative country in the world. Tourists who want to visit the remote Himalayan nation are required to travel with tour companies and pay a minimum daily package, which ranges from $200 per day in the low season to $290 per day in the high season. Bhutan also shirks GDP as a measurement of development and instead prefers its term GNH, or Gross National Happiness. Understanding this about Bhutan, it's not surprising that it only briefly opened its borders to attempts on Gangkhar Puensum for a 4-year stretch between 1983 and 1987. In 1994, Bhutan outright prohibited mountaineering on all peaks above 6,000 meters in order to honor local spiritual traditions. In that 4-year span, Gangkhar Puensum was attempted just 4 times. But Gangkhar Puensum straddles the border with China, and since Bhutan wasn't issuing permits to climb the mountain, in 1999 a group of Japanese climbers wanted to try and climb it from the Chinese side. They had flown into Lhasa and they were ready to go, but in the midst of preparations, Bhutan made a diplomatic stink of the issue and China yielded. The Japanese team pivoted and directed their efforts toward Gangkhar Puensum's northern subpeak, Liangkang Kangri, which at the time was the second highest unclimbed peak in the world. The Japanese team successfully summited Liangkang Kangri and surely stared down the 2-kilometer knife-edge ridgeline that stood between them and Gangkhar Puensum's true summit. But respectfully, they did not attempt to cross it. Since then, China has upheld Bhutan's request and hasn't granted any permits to climb Gangkhar Puensum from the Chinese side of the border. There are 5 other major climbing obstacles under 6,000 meters. First, we have the 2 frigid peaks, Mount Logan in Canada, renowned for being exceptionally cold and very thick, and then Vinson Massif in Antarctica, which will set you back a cool $40,000. Next, we have a couple of peaks that are technically demanding. First, there's Shikahara, the highest point in Georgia. To explain the difficulty of these climbs, I'm going to use the IFAS grading system, which has become more and more popular internationally. The IFAS system goes from F, facile, to ED, exclamation difficile, and uses these French letters to correspond with different grades for both rock, mixed climbing, and snow and ice climbing. For context, the West Buttress route on Denali is graded as AD, or assez difficile, but I'm going to make a video soon explaining the different climbing grading systems from around the world, and I think it's going to be really interesting, so look out for that. The next challenging peak is Puncak Jaya, also known as the Karstens Pyramid, and it's the highest point on the Indonesian island of Papua. Puncak Jaya is graded as AD+ or D-, making it the most technical of the 7 summits, more technical even than Everest's South Col route. It should be noted though that because it is more purely technical than Everest or Denali does not make it an easier climb, since the IFAS system doesn't factor in altitude or weather in its grading system. The next peak on this list is Willingli Island High Point in the Maldives. Standing at a jaw-dropping 3 meters above sea level, this climb is so challenging that the sea may render it entirely unpassable in the next 100 years. Now, wretched global warming jokes aside, the most difficult peak under 6,000 meters is without a doubt Hakakabo Razi in Myanmar. Hakakabo Razi is as remote as it gets. To just reach the base of the mountain involves a 1-month-long trek through thick jungle. The highest point in Southeast Asia was first summited only 24 years ago in the fall of 1996. Since then, it's been repeated maybe once. I say maybe because it's unclear whether 2 members of the 2014 Myanmar expedition reached the summit, since they never returned down the mountain. In 2016, an elite team of climbers from National Geographic tried to climb it, but they stopped 240 meters shy of the summit. Thankfully, they all returned safely. I highly recommend you check out National Geographic's article on the expedition though. I've linked it in the description and it is a marvel to read. Well, that's all for the first installment of the High Point series. I hope you enjoyed. Now, there are certainly more difficult climbs amongst the 192, but climbing is just a small part of what makes this challenge so immense. The logistics, cost, diplomatic maneuvering, and time involved in climbing all these peaks may be more difficult than the climbing itself, but that's for next time. Thank you for watching. Feel free to like the video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe so you can stay updated for part 2. And you could also share the video if you really feel like it, but you don't have to get too carried away. Anyway, from one adventurer to another, thanks, and have a good day.